In this lecture, we're going to write a test for the Vue application we've developed. We'll need to use a library called Vue Test Utilities. It's a library that's going to help us greatly by making it easier to interact with our Vue application. Currently, I'm looking at the About component file. It's a simple component. It's perfect for writing a test for. We're going to write a test that will check if the component is rendering the text content inside it. This is a common test you may write. You will want to check if a component is outputting the correct content. In order for this to be successful, we'll need to mount the component. Mounting is the process of inserting a component into the document. In an earlier lecture, I mentioned that Vitest doesn't run in the browser. Instead, it runs in Node. Despite Node not having a document, Jest uses a third-party package called JSDOM. JSDOM will take care of creating a virtual document that has a similar API to the document API in the browser. The test we'll write will mount the component onto the JSDOM. If the mounting is successful, we'll be able to check the text inside the component. Let's create the test file. In the tests directory, create a file called about.spec.js. It's important we add the spec.js file extension. It's how Vitest will know which files contain our tests. Other than that, we have full liberty as to how we name our files. I recommend calling your files relative to the component you're testing. We're creating a test for the about component. It makes sense to call the file about.spec.js. Inside the file, we'll call a function called describe. We're going to be writing a couple of tests. During the testing phase, we want to keep things organized. The describe function allows us to group one or more tests together. This is what's called a test suite. Every time we write a new suite of tests, we'll wrap the tests with a describe block. It takes two arguments. The first argument is a string describing the test suite we're creating. We'll pass in the following, about.view. The second argument is a callback function containing the tests. We'll pass in an arrow function. The describe function can be nested multiple times if we'd like. There isn't a limit as to how many times you can nest the describe function. It's a great way to organize your tests further. There's some debate as to whether you should nest describe functions. It's a case-by-case thing. For this course, we're going to limit ourselves to one level of describe blocks. If you want to go further, that's fine. Inside the function, we're going to call the test function. The description for the test will be the following, renders inner text. We'll pass in an arrow function for the second argument. The test we're writing will check if the component renders the inner text we have in the template. It's a rather simple test. Before we can check if the text is present, we need to mount the component. Keep in mind, Vitest runs independently from our application. The music application hasn't been initialized. As far as Vitest is concerned, the document is empty. We'll need to mount the component. Notice how I'm saying component and not instance. The purpose of a unit test is to test bits and pieces of our code in isolation. We don't want to initialize the application if we don't have to. We want to run as little code as possible. A unit test should test small portions of your code in isolation. The about component doesn't rely on external files. This is perfect. We'll be able to test the component completely isolated from the app. There is one problem. Components are not instances of Vue. They're an object that can be registered with the component function. If we want to create an instance out of the component, we'll need to create what's called a constructor function. A constructor function is what takes care of creating a new instance out of an object. When we use the createApp function, we're calling a constructor function with a new instance of Vue. Components don't ship with a constructor function, so we won't be able to mount the component. This issue can be resolved by using the Vue Test Utilities library. It provides a method for converting a component into an instance that can be mounted. At the top of the file, we'll need to import the about component. The path to the file is the following, @/views/about.view. We can continue to use the character in our import paths. The CLI plugin will take care of creating an alias that points to the source directory. This shortcut makes testing so much easier. Next, we'll need to import a function called mount from the View Test Utilities module. The Test Utilities package was installed by the CLI plugin. It's bundled with methods for helping us interact with our View application. The function we're importing will do two things. First, it'll convert a component's options object into a constructor function. It'll then create an instance out of the constructor function it creates. Lastly, it'll mount the instance. It's a single function that conveniently takes care of everything for us. Inside the function, we're going to create a variable called wrapper. Its value will be the object returned by the mount function. The mount function requires the component we'd like to mount. We'll pass in the about component. The mount function returns what's called a wrapper. The wrapper object contains methods and properties for interacting with the component. We'll be able to do things like call methods, retrieve attributes, and even destroy the instance. It's possible to perform this task without the Test Utilities library, but it's much more elegant and quicker to use it. The component is mounted. We can begin to test it. We'll write the assertion in the next lecture.